Your Art Unlocked is produced by Art UK, the online home of the UK's national art collection. This podcast is supported by Bloomberg Connects, the free arts and culture platform that provides access to over 1,300 museums, galleries, and cultural spaces around the world. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Fascinating piece. Just fragility is really coming to me, the idea of a chocolate soldier, somebody who is in appearance strong like the bronze is, yet made of chocolate. The melting emotional state of the piece is very evident.
My initial reaction to the piece was it looked like a primitive man with hands raised either in worship of something or crying out for help, and different emotions being expressed by the position of the arms. And the chocolate container part of it was the wounds of life.
It almost reminds me of a toy soldier or a character from a cartoon, but there's also something quite unsettling about it. The figure seems slightly awkward, and I think the word chocolate in the title suggests that it isn't really this tough military figure, and it could easily melt under pressure. So it's quite vulnerable.
The F.E. McWilliam Studio and Gallery in Banbridge houses a collection of sculptures, models and works on paper by the Northern Irish sculptor Frederick Edward McWilliam, and here you'll also find a remarkable recreation of the artist's former London studio. Look carefully through the window of this unassuming wooden building, which is located in the gallery's sculpture garden, and sitting amongst pieces of plaster, tools, nuts and bolts are two moulded plastic trays. Like the ones you find at the bottom of a box of chocolates, the kind of trays that are normally thrown away once the contents have been eagerly gobbled up. But what might these empty chocolate boxes have to do with F.E. McWilliam's art? Well, the body of one of McWilliam's works, Chocolate Soldier, which he made in 1977, in the middle of a remarkable decade for the artist as he approached his 70s, was in fact cast from the insides of a chocolate box. So what might seem like rubbish actually had a really big impact on McWilliam's artistic approach. He often saw the creative potential in such throwaway objects. My name is Dickon Hall, and in this episode of Your Art Unlocked, a podcast that brings to life some of the more unexpected objects in museum collections, I'm going to find out about McWilliam's Chocolate Soldier, looking at the inspiration he took from different sources and finding out why he's often seen as a surrealist artist, as well as exploring the particular connections this work might have with Northern Ireland. This is Your Art in your museums and galleries, so let's get to know it a little better. Now, we know this is a podcast, so before we get started properly, if you want to look at this work for yourself as you listen, head to Art UK and search for Chocolate Soldier. Chocolate Soldier is cast in bronze, which became the artist's main medium from the 1950s. McWilliam is often called a surrealist sculptor, and looking at this strange work it's perhaps clear why. Here we have a figure without a head, its bent legs giving it a squat position, its arms defiantly raised up. If the word soldier conjures an intimidating presence, then you might be disappointed. At just under 2 feet in height, this headless figure is pretty dinky. It was in the mid-1930s that McWilliam became associated with the British Surrealist group, and the influence of Surrealism came to the surface at various stages in his later career. You can see this in his use of found objects, taking something we wouldn't normally associate with art, just like the chocolate box tray, and using it in an imaginative and innovative way.
The studio collection here at the F.E. McWilliam Gallery helps us to understand McWilliam's use of found objects and where his interest in found objects came from, because it includes many items from his studio, including petals that he found on the beach and different tools and gourds and all sorts of kind of interesting elements that he then introduced into his sculpture and things that gave him inspiration.
This is Dr Riann Coulter, curator at the F.E. McWilliam Gallery.
Included in the collection is the plastic interior of a chocolate box, which may have been the actual box that McWilliam used to mould Chocolate Soldier. We also have some odd bits of metal which we believe he used to create the texture on his monumental sculpture, Princess Maca. We do find that people are really interested in how things are made, particularly sculpture, and that they love to see McWilliam's tools and items that they might have in their own tool shed.
The surrealist thread is also obvious in McWilliam's playful approach to the figure, where he often left out limbs, heads or bodies in his elegant partial depictions of the human form. One late series of bronzes only uses legs in various arrangements to suggest the human figure. This way of depicting the human form really comes to the fore in Chocolate Soldier. Riann explains more.
McWilliam's concentration on the human figure can be linked back to his early interest in surrealism. He was very influenced by European surrealism, though he did say that he was for the surrealists but not of them, because he didn't like joining groups or being part of any particular movement. I think his interest in the figure was also influenced by the sculptors who inspired him, including Brancusi and Giacometti, and his contemporary Henry Moore. They were all just as important, I believe, as surrealism, probably, for that element. He did continue to focus on the figure throughout his career, and it's something he kept coming back to. I think he also just really enjoyed figure drawing, and he was very skilled at depicting the human form.
F.E. McWilliam, often known as Mac to his friends, was born in 1909 in the town of Banbridge, which is about 25 miles south of Belfast. The studio and gallery that bears his name is located on the edge of the town and just off the main motorway that runs between Belfast and Dublin. But it's well worth making the trip, as it's home to an amazingly diverse and extensive collection of work and archive material by, I would argue anyway, one of the great Irish figurative sculptors of the 20th century. Following McWilliam's death on the 3rd of May 1992, his daughters gifted the contents of his London studio, and even the studio building itself, and a number of sculptures by McWilliam to the town of Banbridge. And in 2008, the present gallery was opened. It includes an exhibition space and that remarkable recreation of McWilliam's Holland Park studio. Here you'll find many of the bronze sculptures that McWilliam is best known for, which range from small works that you can hold in the palm of one hand to much larger ones which live in the sculpture garden. There's also a unique display of plaster models and maquettes. Scale models sculptors use as a draft for a larger finished piece. McWilliam used these as part of his process to make bronzes. You can also see works in some of the more unusual experimental mediums such as liquid metal, plastic wood or wax. The gallery also has exciting plans for its future.
As you can see, we're currently in a building site and we're in the middle of a major construction project at the F.E. McWilliam Gallery. It's a very exciting project. We're basically doubling the size of a facility. It's a project that's funded by the UK government, by the Wolfson Foundation and by the Northern Ireland Museums Council. And it's going to be transformative for the institution. It's going to allow us to really welcome a lot more education and community groups and expand our engagement programme. And I suppose for this point of view, this project, it's really important because we're going to have a major new collection gallery, which will allow us to show so much more of F.E. McWilliam's work and allow us to have a lot more interpretation for that.
You can find out more about the F.E. McWilliam Gallery and hundreds of other collections on Bloomberg Connects, the free arts and culture platform. Download the app today.
In later years, McWilliam described his memories of being brought up in Banbridge and the importance of seeing craftsmen at work in the busy Ulster market town, especially watching objects being made by hand. After studying briefly at Belfast College of Art, he was awarded a place at the Slade School of Fine Art in London, where he studied painting as well as sculpture. McWilliam wasn't the only student from Belfast College of Art studying at a London art school, but unlike many of them, he stayed on in England and also spent some time in Paris, which was still at that time the centre of international modernism. He visited the studio of the avant-garde sculptor Brancusi, whose carving was a strong early influence. And when he returned to London, McWilliam met the British sculptor Henry Moore, who shared his interest in carving and abstraction. They remained close for some years. In 1958, 30 long years after he had left to study in London, McWilliam received his first major commission for a work in the country of his birth, a large bronze representing the mythological Princess Macha at Atlgaelvin Hospital in Derry. His friend William Scott, who was brought up in Enniskillen in County Fermanagh, was also commissioned to produce a large mural for the same hospital. They are now seen as two of the most significant commissioned works of art of the period in Northern Ireland.
McWilliam's piece Princess Macha, which was commissioned for Atlgaelvin Hospital in Derry, was the first major public sculpture that he ever did. And it's an interesting moment in his career when he reconnected with Ireland, and particularly with Northern Ireland. I also think it does show that he was an important stage in his career in the 1950s. He actually did connect with Ireland earlier in his career in a piece called Irish Head in 1949, which was also known as Head in Green and Brown. It was a large carving carved in Horton stone, but Princess Macha was his first major public commission. We believe that the theme for Princess Macha was set by the hospital authorities because Macha was a legendary figure who was believed to have founded the first hospital in Ireland at Ewan Macha near Armagh. The architect of the hospital, Eugene Rosenberg, was involved in selecting both Effie McWilliam and his friend and contemporary William Scott, who also made a major work for Altnagelvin. Both pieces were received badly initially by the public in Northern Ireland, but have since become much loved public artworks.
But by the beginning of the 1970s, McWilliam was working on a more playful series of sculptures based on the female body, generally known as the Girls series, and they obviously show the influence of surrealism. These bronzes drew their inspiration partly from magazine advertisements and other unexpected sources, and McWilliam might leave out a head or a torso and reduce the elements of the body while still giving an imaginative or even erotic sense of human form or presence. In this decade, when he also made Chocolate Soldier, McWilliam made works that introduced, for example, a fig leaf above a pair of folded legs, or a cap above the lower half of a seated body, and even legs and arms with a hand holding a cup of tea, but without a head or torso. But what about the political context? In the 1970s, life in Northern Ireland was dominated by the Troubles, decades of violence and social and political unrest, which came to an end thanks to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. McWilliam's work had largely avoided political or social comment, but in 1972, in response to the bombing of a restaurant in Belfast, he began work on the Woman of Belfast series, showing figures in the aftermath of an explosion. Such social and political engagement really separates this series from much of McWilliam's previous work, but it's still an interesting context for thinking about Chocolate Soldier. Also relevant here is a subsequent series of sculptures by McWilliam, the Banners series, a number of which are in the collection here, which present slightly comic figures engaged in protests and carrying banners with a wide range of slogans, some serious, such as No Broken Province, and others more light-hearted, such as Buy More Art. So Chocolate Soldier is actually quite an unusual McWilliam sculpture in many ways, as Riann explains.
It is typical of McWilliam's work in that it is figurative and playful and often uses elements of the body. So this particular figure has no head, it has arms and legs and a torso. But it is different from some of the other figures in that it is a male figure. Most of his works did focus on the female form. It's also unusual in that he has used a found object, in this case a chocolate box, to cast the actual torso of the figure.
As Riann says, it uses an apparently male figure. And also, while McWilliam mostly worked in lengthy series during this later period, often exploring a theme over several years, Chocolate Soldier is a single, standalone sculpture. And it's definitely fair to say that the work is ambiguous. As there is no face, we as viewers are left to figure out the way in which McWilliam uses a figure's limbs to express emotion and meaning. And are the raised arms struggling against being held and expressing frustration and powerlessness? Or is this a moment of breaking free, and are the arms raised in celebration? We are left to judge for ourselves. So the artist doesn't really give the work a clear meaning, or even indicate if we should look for one. And in fact, McWilliam doesn't appear to have ever commented on the work. But considering it was made shortly after the two main groups of his work in the 1970s, the Woman of Belfast series and also the Banners series, I think it makes sense to think about Chocolate Soldier in the light of McWilliam's political focus. What does Riann think?
McWilliam was never explicitly political throughout his career. However, due to the events in the 1970s, both in Northern Ireland and worldwide conflicts such as the Vietnam War, he did become more responsive to political situations. And his work, including the Women of Belfast series, do reference conflict. But for McWilliam, it was always about the victims, about the ordinary people who suffered through conflict and war. So he never really sided with the perpetrators or celebrated war as such. Chocolate Soldier, I think, can be interpreted in many different ways, and it can be seen as a criticism of war or a comment about the sort of idea of heroicism and really sort of shooting that down.
Take the fact that McWilliam has borrowed his title, The Chocolate Soldier, from an operetta by Oscar Strauss, which was first performed in 1908 and was based on George Bernard Shaw's 1894 play Arms and the Man. In this work, a soldier turns out to be quite different from the image he projects, carrying chocolates instead of ammunition. It very deliberately deflates contemporary heroic attitudes towards war and the military. Here's Riann again.
But McWilliam always left his work open, so it can be interpreted on many levels by different people. It can just be seen as a playful sculpture, or it can be seen as a very particular reference to that period. The humour that is included in Chocolate Soldier is something that carries on throughout Effie McWilliam's career. It's quite playful and imaginative, and also, I suppose, challenging the idea of traditional sculpture and finding different ways to introduce different elements into the process of making. The literary references of Chocolate Soldier, which are linked to George Bernard Shaw's play Arms and the Man, is another thing that McWilliam did do throughout his career. He was very inspired particularly by James Joyce, and there are some of the Banner series which reference Joyce specifically.
The chocolate box tray does look a bit like an armoured vest, giving the figure a more military appearance. But this also adds to the sense of absurdity, precisely because we know this torso is in fact made from a chocolate box. This is why using a found object can be so useful for an artist, because it brings a range of different associations into a work. It might look out of place when we know what its original use was, so it has a sense of the surreal or the humorous. Knowing its original identity as part of a box of chocolates helps identify a link between the title, Chocolate Soldier, and the work. A found object might also look like something else quite different, which can bring a new meaning to the work. In this case, its resemblance to old-fashioned armour also reinforces the figure's military identity. With this hint, we might read Chocolate Soldier as a work that wants to speak to the destructive and fruitless cycles of violence that were taking place in Northern Ireland during the 1970s, during the Troubles, and see McWilliam's work as expressing the frustration and horrors of a country caught up in this complex and harrowing situation. If anything, Chocolate Soldier is a reminder of McWilliam's constant ingenuity, his ability to push sculpture in different directions. While schooled in the language of sculpture and an important figure in the history of both modernism and surrealism, McWilliam was an immensely communicative artist, and his work is very accessible, despite its ambiguity and complexity.
McWilliam definitely left the meaning open-ended. It is a very popular work, particularly with school groups. And it's once you point out to them that his actual armour, his torso figure, is made from a chocolate box. And of course, everyone has seen and had chocolate boxes, and they're such interesting forms in themselves. So the fact that McWilliam used this to create something which is quite a fine, high sculpture in bronze, a material which we associate with very high art, I think is very playful and fun, and kids often think, oh yes, I could do that. And even sometimes we'll have classes where they'll use sort of junk art, so using materials and recycling objects to make their own figures. And I think they really connect to the fact that here this famous sculptor was also using items that can be found in your recycling bin.
Turns out an old box of chocolates isn't just rubbish, but sits at the heart of this fascinating and unusual 20th century sculpture.
Your Art Unlocked is produced by Art UK, the online home of the UK's national art collection, supported by Bloomberg Connects. Explore more art at artuk.org.